Welcome to Essential Coaching Conversations with Kyle and Asim.
The real, relevant, necessary conversations to help you navigate coaching, teaching, learning, and life.
Coaches, welcome back. Season 3, Episode 3. And today it might be a little bit heavy on this one, but just to introduce again what we're doing here in 2025, we've decided to do things a little bit differently, try to be a little more essential. Kyle, tell the folks what we're doing.
Yep. In 2025, we decided to go back and a bit to the drawing board and come back to our roots and our name of Essential Coaching Conversations and try to get right to the heart of the matter and bring a little bit more quick hitting. Again, hopefully they're still just as dense and just as good, and we give you some things to think about. But instead of listening to us talk quite so much, it'll give you the opportunity to knock an episode out, do a little bit more thinking, and create a little bit more space for some introspective thought and a chance to maybe dive into the episode a little bit more on your own self. And let us just kind of get right to it. And again, we're busy. We've got a 20-minute trip to the store. You've got you're going to go walk the dog. We're going to run to the mailbox, short commute to work, maybe a quick grabbing a bite to eat, whatever. Hopefully you can knock an episode out, or maybe even if you do have a little bit of a longer drive, you can stack a couple of these and it'll give you some things to think about, create a little reflection, and then take you down that RACA pathway of reflection, awareness, clarity, and alignment, and get a little something out of it. So if you haven't checked the first 2 episodes from season 3 with a little bit of I wouldn't say a part 1 and part 2, but definitely tied together when we talked about Mick Cronin's bursts after a loss and how he handled things, and then compared that to Kevin O'Connell with the Minnesota Vikings, and just, the 2 different approaches and styles. And maybe we're seeing a bit of a changing of the guard and hopefully a tipping point more towards the Kevin O'Connell way of handling adversity versus the Mick Cronin way of handling adversity. So yeah. Excited that you guys are here and listening, and we appreciate. Hard to believe we're into season 3 of Essential Coaching Conversations. And so if you've been with us since the very beginning, or this is your first episode, we welcome you.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we have a loyal cadre of listeners, and I'm hopeful that these shorter episodes add more and people get involved. And, we're always looking for comments and stuff, so please feel free to leave those. Ratings are always nice. We never ask for them, but if you feel so inclined, definitely do it. Today, Kyle, let's talk a little bit about, and this has been brought on by obviously like the California wildfires, right? And that's a major crisis that's going on. Teams in LA had their games postponed. There were bowl games that were going to be played in California. They got moved to Arizona, so on and so forth. But I think from a broader perspective, let's talk a little bit about the role of sports when it comes to crisis, and particularly playing through crises or playing around crises. And I think, from a high school perspective, obviously our hearts go out to the folks in California. We're going to put some links in the show notes. If folks want to donate or get involved or something, please feel free to do that. I think they can use all the help they can get. But even from like a high school perspective, not in California, there's obviously an epidemic of mental health issues within the teenage population. That's not something that is new, but it's certainly something that has come to light more and more. And we were talking in the pre-show about this, but like even the idea of crisis being localized in your community. When I was starting at Woodson, part of the reason that I was hired there was the year before that, the school year before I started there were 6 suicides, like 6 student suicides, and they were all athletes. And not to make it that they were all athletes, so we should stop playing, or that carries some special significance or something like that, right? Death is death. Grieving is grieving. It is a horrible thing. But I wondered also what the role of sports was in helping people get through that crisis, and helping people, whether it was as a distraction or whether it was like, this is the right thing to do for the kids. I had a lot of questions about that myself, of like, what is the right thing to do for kids who are clearly grieving the loss of their classmate that they grew up with, or there's some crisis, whether it's a fire, whether it's homelessness, you know what I mean? Like there's so many of these things that can happen. And so just talking about the role of sports in that, like how do we reconcile playing a game and keeping that in perspective when there are like real life crises going on every single day? And so I'll throw it to you for your initial thoughts about that.
Yeah, I would just kind of ask people as they're listening to this. I mean, just think locally for you. Like, you might not live in California and deal with wildfires. That's nothing I've ever had to deal with in my life. Now, I live in Louisiana and we deal with tornadoes, multiple times a year. And I've lived in towns that have been devastated by tornadoes and lost people and friends. And maybe you live on a coast and you deal with hurricanes. It could be flooding. It could be a number of things. But regardless of that, anybody old enough listening to this thing, we all lived through COVID. And I won't say it's a funny thing, but like the ironic thing, I guess, and we talk about this quite a bit, is like the perspective we all gained during COVID of just wanting to get back out on the court with our guys, wanting to play with the team one more time, just any opportunity we could get to feel that connection and the feeling of being on a team and all this and that. We lost it so fast 2 weeks after we came back to, quote unquote, whatever your normal was. And so even if you have not dealt with 6 athlete suicides at your school or a wildfire or a tornado or a hurricane, just think back to what things were like during COVID when you all of a sudden everything ceased to exist. Like you just had to stop, full stop. You couldn't go to the park, couldn't do anything, right? And so just kind of getting into that mindset and that frame of mind of like, what would I want or what would I need as an athlete? What do I want to need as a coach? And then what is your role as the coach, or even a parent or a fan, or maybe you're just a support staff at the school or anything like that? And I definitely think, at the end of the day, sports are sports. Like, they're not that important. They are not life or death. As much as we militarize training and sport and in the trenches and, fighting with the person in the foxhole with it, like as much as we sort of use those terminologies and phrases, it shouldn't be life or death. It should be sport. Sports are games. Games should be fun. And I think it helps to get that perspective back. But what I do think is that crisis sometimes can help us not only gain that perspective, but we get back to the like more purer form of sport and why we got into it in the first place. And so like, why are we playing this game? And again, this is going to be a little different depending on where you are in your level. We went through COVID, and I'll be damned, we're going to have the NBA finals. We're going to play in a bubble. And it's going to be weird, and we're going to do everything we can to get LeBron a championship with the Lakers.
Anything possible to make sure bettors are happy.
We have got to make sure that we have a bubble, right? Now, your Division IV non-select softball championship doesn't have that kind of money and stuff tied to it. So I do think there are kind of two conversations here, but at the end of the day, like, we want to play sport and get back to the more purer form of like why we got into it in the first place. It's connection, it's fun, it's distracting. And I totally get somebody wanting to get out of forgetting about life for a second, forgetting that the world's on fire, forgetting that there's flooding uptown, forgetting that people have lost and this and that. And I don't think that it's insensitive to want to play, because it's not like you're just ignoring it. But I do get that for your own mental health, you might need to be able to escape from it a little bit. And I mean, I think back to when Mark David was killed by the drunk driver. Like, that happened on a Saturday early morning. He died on a Sunday, and I played in a basketball game Monday that very next day, 24 hours after he passed away. Yeah. And everybody told me I didn't have to do that, but I felt like I needed to. I felt like he would have wanted me to. I felt like I needed to show myself that I could kind of pick pieces up and move on. And I wanted the distraction. And I remember sitting there, I got fouled. I didn't play very much, but I wanted to play. And I got a chance to shoot 2 free throws, and I was a nervous wreck on the first one. And I probably damn near airballed it. And I was able to refocus and correct and make the second one. And I don't know, for some reason, like, not that the free throw outcome should have been that important, but for me in that moment, that was a big deal, because it was me being able to get kind of begin to move past that in some kind of way. And if somebody wants to play, I completely respect that. On the other hand, if somebody doesn't, I completely respect that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think as a coach, you have to let people have, it's an individual case by case basis. And if the team comes and says, "Hey, coach, we want to play, we want to go out there and put on and be great sports, and we want to do this for the people and give them something to cheer about," 3 of your players or your best player is like, "Man, I ain't feeling it," I think you've got to respect
Mhm.
both of those things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think like we had a situation when I was at Brandeis where there was a fatal bus crash
Mm.
involving our students. And we had a third party vendor when we were there. And like, I don't know a lot of the details of it, but campus was a wreck. Like it was, they were bringing in therapy or therapists. And, a lot of our kids knew people that were on that bus. I brought my dog up there and we postponed a game, right? Because like it was just too fresh and too real. And I remember we asked our kids, like, hey, do you guys want to play? And half of our kids were like, yeah. And half of our kids were like, maybe. And we had a couple kids who were like, no, I don't really feel like I can play. And my question to you is, do we go with the majority or do we say like, hey, if one person on our team doesn't feel comfortable playing, we win together, we lose together, like we're not going to do it? Right. I think that united front is also something that helps people get through something, right? Maybe we're not going to play, but we're going to do something as a team to try to heal from the crisis or to, in the case of the wildfires, right? Like speaking of UCLA, we just talked about Mick Cronin a couple episodes ago. How galvanizing would it be? Not to say that I'm telling Mick Cronin what to do, right? I'm not, but I'm just sort of spitballing here for the coaches that are listening to this, right? If maybe guys don't want to play. Maybe their stuff is gone, right? JJ Redick's house burned down in the Palisades. Like it's just gone, right? Maybe instead of playing, we take our talents elsewhere and help the people around us who pay good money to watch us play or who are part of our community. And we have the platform on which we can stand to make society a little bit better for everybody else. And even that can be healing. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think everything is so case by case, right?
Sure,
Like, I mean,
sure.
could UCLA's troubles be part of that? I mean, it could be, and that's where like the dehumanizing aspect of this. Like, I'm gonna stand up here and tell you that I think you're soft and I'm tougher than you. It's like, man, like my parents are losing their home over here. Like, let's have some perspective. But then on the flip side of that, the Rams, Kevin O'Connell, we talked about, great year. They go out and they beat the dog crap out of the Vikings.
Right.
And LA, like maybe that's the galvanizing thing. I mean, I lived through Katrina in New Orleans, and it was like the Saints win the Super Bowl. It was nothing stopping the Saints from winning that Super Bowl. Like it was like an act of God that it did not matter how well or how bad they played. Like it was destiny that brought that Drew Brees united that city, united that state. Like I'm not a Saints fan, but my God, was that awesome and powerful to watch, and people coming together, and that sport can be that vehicle to get you back moving forward. Like that gives you something to be a part of, because you might not be a player. You're not going to have the privilege of playing in the NFL, but I might be a fan of that team.
Right.
And I might need that distraction. But on the flip side of that, is it fair for me, the fan, to make you, the player, have to keep entertaining me? And I think that's where the conversation gets
a really good question,
a little interesting. And I mean, we just dealt with this in Louisiana again, the Sugar Bowl, or the terrorist attack down in New Orleans, where people were mowed down by a van, and there were assault rifles, and we didn't know if there were bombs on the street, and blah blah blah. And the Sugar Bowl decides to postpone the game for a day, and people were like, "You can't do that. How can you move the Sugar Bowl? Like it's part of the college football playoff. Like everything has to go according to plan. Like we can't do that." And after going through a last minute bowl game, like, preparing for all of that, like part of me felt for everybody on the logistics side, because everything that you have to do that, from TV to concessions to tickets to this and that, like that would be a bit of a nightmare scenario to pull off. But then again, at the end of the day, whether the concessions are full or not is not the most important thing in the world after a tragedy like that happens and people lost their lives. Right. So, and I think that's where sport can and should be used as a tool for perspective and helping us kind of move past it. But I think it is a lot to ask of those that have to go through that, because I might have been a ticket taker for the Sugar Bowl, but a friend of mine got killed on Bourbon Street that night. Like it's not my job to show up to make sure your game goes on. And that's where I think you've got to, it's difficult because it can be such a case by case basis. But if we are trying to put it front as a team, as a school, as a university, or even as a city or a state or a country. I mean, going back to, George Bush can come out and throw a strike against the Yankees after 9/11. Like, how do you move forward in a way that allows everybody to unite, but at the same time give everybody their own individualistic opportunity to do what is best for them? And it's
Right.
difficult, man. I don't think any of those situations are easy by any means.
No, definitely not. And right, that's why it is a crisis. If it was easy,
Mhm.
it would just be normal.
Sure.
Right.
No,
And we
great
don't
point,
want
yeah.
it to be normal, right? We don't
Yep.
ever want crisis to be normal, but it's an emergency when it's an emergent situation.
Yep.
It's, the other part of this too is, and you mentioned COVID, and we talk about COVID a lot because that's really when we started essential coaching and all of that stuff. But that perspective went away
So
after
fast.
like a couple of weeks, right?
Yep.
How do we maintain that perspective when there is no crisis?
I think that's the question right there. We almost, not that you want to invent bad things to happen, but it's almost like you have to live, and this might sound terrible, but you almost kind of have to live in crisis mode sometimes and think about what things could be like.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so I think that's where the Raka comes in. Like we do need to, maybe the answer here is that sometimes we just need to be intentional about stopping for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about what we do have, and gratitude isn't talked about enough. And the comparison of the grass is greener or this or that, or woe is me for an older generation or whatever. Sometimes just stopping, taking stock in what we do have and appreciating that for what it is probably the most important thing we can do. And again, like, I mean, I don't want to spend the entire season 3 like bashing Mick Cronin here or anything like that, but like there are other things at play right now, more important than your 5-game losing streak. Now, it's your job and your livelihood, and again, I get and respect some of that, but sometimes I think we can lean into sports so much that it makes us feel pretty tone deaf.
Yeah.
To a lot of things. And that's where I think we have to be careful. Again, New Orleans rallying around Drew Brees and New Orleans Saints to allow the state to pick up the pieces and move forward. I think that was real, man. That played a part in us getting back as a state and being able to do what we're doing and so on and so forth. But at the same time, like whether they win the Super Bowl or they don't, does that really lessen the impact of what Katrina has done over the last 25 years? No, not at all.
No, it doesn't lessen the impact. I think it serves as the respite from rebuilding, right? Just like, UCLA going to play a game, or USC playing a game, or the Lakers going back after their games were postponed and making those up, or hosting a game, or whatever it is, right? Like, I think it's the respite from the tragedy and the respite from the crisis. It doesn't mean the crisis goes away. It just softens the blow a little bit and gives you a little bit of that distraction, right? It's the same thing as like, on every single thing that I watch with like a live event, it's, hey, we're recognizing that this particular crisis in California is going on. We are here to help you. We will hope we can serve as a distraction for you. Please make sure you donate whatever it is. And I think it's the same thing with you and I, right? There are crises in our lives all the time. Right. And we use the ability to record and bring content to our loyal listeners and, try to go out and make a difference in the world as the respite from those crises. And you sort of live from crisis to crisis and situation to situation. And maybe the next best decision is to try to find distraction and try to find perspective during the crisis. And maybe that helps people heal. Right. Like, I think, there are so many societal traumas that have happened in the last, in our lifetime. Let's just say that in our lifetime, there's been a lot that has happened. And yet here we are, and we continue to persist and continue to keep going. And so I think that there is a place for sport, certainly in crisis, or in times of need. And my hope is that us as coaches, us as administrators, us as people who have influence, that we don't need at some point something bad to happen to understand the perspective behind why sport exists and the beauty behind it. That's my wish for 2025, is that we gain more and more of that perspective.